Some people would like kids to believe in evolution. They want them to believe that we all came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago, and they have to give them some evidence. One of the evidences presented in just about every textbook is this one right here. This textbook says we have evidence of evolution from micro or molecular biology. Now, what do they mean by that? Well, molecular, of course, means at the molecule level, very, very, very tiny, and biology is the study of life. Bio means life, ology means the study of. So they're saying the study of extremely small branches of life, the molecules, gives evidence for evolution. Well, now, does it really? Let's just talk about that. A molecule is very tiny. A good illustration to understand how small a molecule is, the best one I know of, is a grain of salt. You know how small a grain of salt is, right? 1 cube of salt is very tiny. If you took a grain of salt and expanded it so that it was as tall as the Sears Tower, 1,200 feet tall, I believe the Sears Tower is, and 1,200 feet wide and 1,200 feet deep. If you expanded it to that size, the molecules would expand at the same ratio. They would become large enough that they would become the size of the original grain of salt. How many grains of salt would it take to stack up to be equal to the top of the Sears Tower? Several, right? That's how many molecules are stacked up the side of a cube of salt. So molecules are extremely tiny, and they're telling the kids, see, we've got evidence from molecular biology. Well, in the early 50s, Jan, did you find anything about DNA in those old textbooks? Not even mentioned. 1911 biology textbook doesn't mention DNA at all, does it? How about the 1925 textbook? No mention at all. What did you find in yours, Steve? About molecular biology. Or DNA.
DNA. I got that 3 natural processes underlying evolution.
They emphasize evolution in every case, right? Did you find it in yours? About DNA? Yeah, in all the new textbooks, those are 98 edition textbooks. I've got some 2001s in the office. I couldn't find them in a hurry there, but all the new textbooks say DNA offers evidence for evolution. Well, now, DNA is deoxyribonucleic acid. It is a molecule. The DNA molecule is the most complicated molecule in the universe that is known today. This textbook says the greater the percentage of DNA sequence, the greater they have, the more they have in common. In other words, they're comparing the sequences and saying this proves some kind of similarity. This textbook says Darwin speculated that all forms of life are related through descent with modification from earliest organisms. Earliest organisms. This speculation has been verified as we have learned more about molecular biology. Look what they're teaching the kids in this book. They're saying, Darwin guessed that everything was related. Now we know it's true. That's the propaganda the kids have to face. Now we know it's true. Now just hold on a minute. If there are similar DNA sequences, and we'll get into that in a minute, would that prove we're related? Or could it prove we have the same designer? Would you agree that the Ford and the, let's take the Ford Lincoln, say Lincoln Continental, and the other cars built by Ford Motor Company have lots of similarities. Probably many of them have a radiator in the front, and a front bumper, and a back bumper, and 4 tires, and the tires are round as they can make them. Does that prove they all evolved from a golf cart? Or could it prove they have the same designers, the same engineers? So what happens here, we get into a logical fallacy. They say, well, look, because we're similar DNA to these organisms, therefore we must be related. I say, no, no, no. We have a common designer. So don't fall into the trap that this proves evolution or even helps to support evolution. It does not. This is a lie that's in the textbooks that kids have to face every day, and they'll say, well, we've got proof for evolution from DNA. This is a picture of a DNA molecule. If you took a ladder, if we had a long extension ladder, a real long extension ladder that went about from here to Chicago, and we had one end, somebody holding that end still in Chicago, and here I am in Florida, and I start twisting my end of the ladder, and twist it around and around and around, sort of like twisting up a watch band, okay? The individual rungs of the ladder are called the genes, G-E-N-E. So when they talk about genetic similarity, that's what they're talking about. These genes are similar. So if we have this ladder that goes from Florida to Chicago, and we have twisted it up in a long spiral, The two sides of the ladder stay the same distance apart, but it kind of curves as it goes around, and the rungs of the ladder, the round part, will hold it that distance apart, but now it's like a spiral staircase. If we twist it and twist it and twist it, it starts pretty soon to knot in on itself, so it's actually double twisted. And you can tell by the picture here, if you take a DNA molecule and unwind it, it becomes incredibly long. You figure the average human body has 50 trillion cells. The only cell visible to the naked eye is the egg cell that a woman produces in order to have a baby. All other cells in the body are too small to see without at least a good magnifying glass, and in most cases, a microscope. With a real strong magnifying glass, you can see cells. You can we did experiments in biology class where you take a popsicle stick and you scrape the inside of your cheek, and you can get skin cells off very easily. Put it on a piece of glass, stick it under the microscope, add a little iodine, and it'll stain the cells, and you can actually study the different parts of the cell. A cell is sort of like, I guess an egg is the best example, at least in an animal cell, because they have an outer membrane that is soft, and then all the stuff, there's thousands of things inside the cell. One cell is more complicated than a city. But inside the cell is another little membrane that holds the nucleus. Like inside the egg is the yolk, the yellow part to the egg. Inside that nucleus are the DNA molecules. So we're talking really, really tiny. DNA wasn't even discovered until probably the middle of this century. You can see the old textbooks don't even mention it at all. I meant to get some of the 1940 textbooks I've got and 50 and 60 textbooks and compare and see when they begin talking about DNA. It'd be a good research project somebody could do. But Francis Crick and somebody else, I forget his name, got a Nobel Prize for discovering the DNA molecule. I think it was in the 1950s when they got that. So they called it the double helix because it twists and then it twists again while it's twisted. Those DNA molecules are incredibly tiny. But if you unwound one of them, it would be about 6 or 7 feet long. 46 of these DNA molecules, and one DNA molecule is called a chromosome. Each chromosome contains millions of genes. So the gene is like the rung of the ladder. The entire thing is called the chromosome. You have 46 of these in each cell in your body, except for the gametes. Now, a gamete is a sex cell. The egg and the sperm are called gametes. They each have 23, half of the genetic information. And when a woman gets pregnant, the half from the male and the half from the female join together and makes it back to 46. So a fertilized embryo, a fertilized egg, now has 46 chromosomes. It got half from the mother and half from the father. So during the process when it divides, it's called a gamete. See, these chromosomes, about 46 of them in every cell in a human. Average human has 50 trillion cells in their body, which is a number that is just beyond comprehension. For those that don't remember, when you count, a million is the number 1,000 with one more group of zeros. So it would be 1,000 plus 3 more zeros. A billion has 2 sets of zeros. So a total of 9 zeros. It's 1,000 plus 2 sets of zeros. And a trillion has 3 sets of zeros. If you learn to count in Latin, you can count as high as you care to go. Million for mono, billion for bi, like a bicycle has 2 wheels, trillion for tricycle, like 3 wheels, quadrillion would be next, like a quad runner or something with 4-wheel drive, quadratraction for the Jeep. Then quintillion would be 5 sets of zeros plus the original 1,000. And then sextillion, septillion, octillion, novillion, decillion. And who cares, right? Anyway, so a trillion cells is an awfully lot of cells. When you figure the entire population of the planet is nowhere close to this number. There are only about 6 billion people in the world. This is 50,000 billion cells in your body. Each one of those cells contains a little nucleus in the center, and the vast majority have 46 chromosomes. A few have 23, the gametes do. If you took all the DNA out of one person, it would fill about 2 tablespoons. Teaspoons are the small ones, tablespoons are the big ones. It would fill 2 tablespoons with just pure DNA. If you took one chromosome from every individual on the planet, and this chromosome, each chromosome contains the blueprint, the instructions for how to build the entire person. So if you had one chromosome from each person on the planet, theoretically, you could make every person again. You have the information to make a new Becky or a new Steve or a new Eric or whoever, okay, from one chromosome. All of that information, 5 billion or 6 billion chromosomes, would be about the size of an aspirin. That's the information capable of making every human being again on the planet. That's with our current understanding. We may discover later that even this is mostly space and it could be condensed even smaller than that. Just unbelievably complicated. Now, if you unwound each one of those chromosomes, number 46 in each cell, each one is about 6 or 7 feet long. So you get 6 or 7 feet times 46 times 50 trillion. One person's chromosomes would stretch from Earth to the moon and back. Round trips. 5 million round trips to the moon. And keep in mind, that is like a twisted ladder. Now, to make it even more interesting, if we had our ladder from here to Chicago, and we twisted it and twisted it and twisted it, and as you, like you do a rubber band, you get it tighter and tighter, and pretty soon it starts to double knot. You know, it starts to loop again. Okay, similar idea. We're going to take this long ladder from here to Chicago and split it all the way down the middle. Each one of the rungs of the ladder is going to be cut in half, all the way from here to Chicago, while it's twisted. It is going to unwind from the other half, so we have 2 half ladders. That's going to join up with the other half ladder from your husband or wife, wind itself back together from here to Chicago, and make a child. Each half of the rung is a genetic trait. Maybe the dad supplies the half of the rung for blonde hair and the wife supplies the half of the rung for brown hair. Well, which one's the baby going to have? Well, that gets into which one of these genes is more dominant. There are dominant and recessive genes. The baby might end up with blonde hair, but capable of producing a brown-haired child. Because even though what expressed itself in that generation was blonde hair, they are carrying the gene, the half rung of the ladder, for brown hair. So then the grandkids come out with brown hair, or depending on who they marry. And that's a very interesting study. You get into that in biology class, studying all the, what can happen when you cross different genes together. But the genetic structure is incredibly complicated. They say that the code in the chromosomes is more complex and holds more information than all the computer programs ever written in the history of humanity combined. Incredibly complicated. Bill Gates, founder of Microsoft, he said, DNA is like a software program, but it's much more complex than anything we've been able to design. Now, when they design a software program, how frequently do they encounter a glitch or a problem? Do any of you work with computers at all? You ever seen a computer have a glitch where the program doesn't work? All the time, right? Now, suppose I told you to take your computer program, we're going to load Windows Millennium Edition, or Windows 98, or Windows 95, okay? Any one of those programs. I want you to take that program with all that list of instructions and copy it onto a disk. Now I want you to take that copy and copy that onto another disk. Then take that disk and copy it onto another disk. The more times you copy it, the more likely you are to have mistakes come in, problems come in. You ever seen a photocopy of a piece of paper where somebody copied an article and somebody else said, wow, this is good, I'm going to make a copy of this. So they copy the copy. Then this person says, wow, that's really good, I'm going to copy that. So they copy the copy of the copy. After about 8 or 10 copies, you can't hardly read it. You ever gotten something like that? You just say, wow, it's all blurred, everything starts to run together. We are a copy, off of a copy, off of a copy, off 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 a copy of Adam. Realize how many times this gene code has been duplicated? And still working pretty good. The original must have been awesome to have this number of generations of copies still working at all, So to say DNA is small and therefore it must be simple is absolutely ridiculous, okay? It is unbelievably complicated. If you typed out the code, now here's what happens. A DNA has 4 base pairs. What they've done is they've taken each of these genes and they take a whole cluster of molecules and call it a base pair, like they give it a letter A. So they will say, well, DNA is very simple. There are only 4 base pairs. Well, hold it. That's like me saying, you know, vehicles on the highway are very simple. There's only 4 basic kinds. You know, there's trucks, there's cars, there's motorcycles, and there's buses. Well, just because I can put them into 4 simple categories doesn't mean each one is simple. Each one of those categories is very complex. You know, how many things are there on a car? Remember, Eric, the first car you had, you know, 13 years old, we rebuilt that old Datsun, or whatever it was, Datsun 510. A car is complicated. How many things would have to be wrong to make a car quit working? Any one of thousands of things. When my dad was in the Marines, he said during World War II, one of their jobs was to go into the islands after they took over from the Japanese, set up radar, the early days of radar. My dad was involved in that, and they had a diesel engine. The engine ran a generator to power, to give them electricity to run the radar station. So they had to be really good mechanics. If anything goes wrong, you got to fix it. As part of their training, they would have somebody come in there after they learned all about the engine, how it runs. They would sabotage it to make it not run, and you had to see how long it took you to figure out the problem. Can you imagine all the neat things you could do to cause an engine to not run, to give somebody a hard time? You take the distributor cap off, take a pencil, whoosh, draw a few lines around there, put it back on. Graphite conducts electricity. So as soon as it tries to spark to one spark plug, the spark goes to all spark plugs. It follows the graphite around the inside. Very simple. Car won't run. He said the hardest one for him to find was when the sergeant came in there and he took the spark plug wires, which are going out. He took a needle, poked it through 2 wires, clipped the needle off, roughed up the rubber so you couldn't tell it was there, but the spark was being conducted from those 2 each time. It was supposed to go to this spark plug, it went to both of them. Engine wouldn't run. He said that was the hardest one to find. Just a simple thing to sabotage it. When you think how the more complex something becomes, the easier it is for something to break down. Look at our space shuttle. You know, we had one blow up. One little O-ring. Out of X number zillion parts on that thing, 1 part went wrong. I was driving on the highway one time in driver's ed. Here I am, teacher sitting beside me, 2 students in the back seat. The car in front of me, in the other lane on the interstate highway, the front wheel began to wobble back and forth wildly. Pretty soon the hubcap flew off and sailed right over our car, just like a frisbee, or like a flying saucer. I speeded up to get past him, because I knew something was wrong. What had happened, the tie rod that ties the 2 front wheels together had broken. And so his steering wheel was controlling one wheel, the other one's flopping back and forth. Well, which way's the car going to go? I don't know, and he didn't know either, and I didn't want to be there to find out. So I just took off and got past him to avoid, but just one little part, a little tie rod broke. In radar, Steve, how many things can go wrong to make your radar station quit working? Anything, right? And it's usually something different every time. DNA is incredibly complicated, so you're going to find some people who mistakenly think that a DNA molecule, they'll say it is very simple because there are only 4 base pairs. That is like saying, you know, traffic patterns are very simple, there's only 4 kinds of vehicles. It's not quite that simple, okay? Matter of fact, it's a long ways from being that simple. If you typed out the genetic code found in the chromosomes of one person, when you got done typing, you'd have enough books to fill Grand Canyon 40 times. An incredible amount of information. Do you realize how many bits of information are required to make a hair? You ever look at a hair under a microscope, you say, man, that thing's unbelievably complex. Now, how does the hair on your arm know to grow a certain distance and stop? But the hair on your chin just keeps growing. How do it know? You ever wonder about that? I mean, you got the hair, then you got the molecules that are producing the hair. And then, if you get a cut, you cut your arm right across a hair follicle, how does the skin cell know, when it fixes the damage, if it's going to make, you know, which kind of skin cell is it supposed to, make to repair the damage? The information contained in the chromosomes is incredibly complicated. Oh, King David said in Psalm 139 many years ago, he said, I will praise thee, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. He didn't even have a microscope, and he knew he ought to praise God. The body is incredibly complicated. So I get nervous when these folks say, well, the body, DNA is very simple. Well, they don't know what they're talking about. DNA is complicated. When a baby is conceived, it begins to multiply. The initial cell splits in half. So here's what happens. You got these 46 chromosomes, 1 fertilized egg cell. Each one of those 46 chromosomes, from here to Chicago, each one, inside that little sac, unwinds, splits in half, makes a copy of itself, and winds back up. And then makes 2 cells. You get about 15,000 new cells per minute for 9 months. Each one of those cells is more complicated than a space shuttle. Now, I say in my seminar, you know, how would you like to work in a factory that produced 15,000 space shuttles a minute? When I worked at General Motors, truck and coach, in Pontiac, Michigan, we made 250 trucks in 8 hours. There was a new truck that came by every 1 minute and 45 seconds. I did my thing on the front end. You know, we put the headlight clamps in and the springs and all that to hold the headlights and the grill and the radiator clips, sent it on to the next guy. He bolted the fenders on, sent it to the next guy. He put the radiator in, you know, started putting the fan shroud on and sent it to the next guy. He flipped it over, put the headlights in and the chrome rims on, sent it on to the next guy. Every minute and 45 seconds, a new truck. We had to work hard with an awful lot of guys to produce 250 trucks in 8 hours. The baby growing in the mother produces 15,000 new cells every minute, round the clock. And I'll say in my seminar, how would you like to work in a factory making 15,000 space shuttles a minute? How would you like to be in charge of supply? Suppose, Steve, your job was to supply the springs that hold the headlights in, and you got to bring enough to the factory to supply 15,000 a minute, forever, never nonstop. You'd be busy running back and forth getting new springs, wouldn't you? A lot of women say, yeah, I did that for 9 months. Man, it's hard. Sometimes the baby wants pickles in the middle of the night, you know. You got to go get up and go get them, you know. So you just never know. I really worry about folks, though, who I think Satan has blinded people into thinking, because it's smaller, therefore it's simpler. And that just simply is not logical. The DNA is the most complex molecule we know of. They say the probability of one DNA happening by chance is 1 times 10 to the 119,000th power. Now, if you don't know the way powers work, 10 to the second power means 10 times itself 2 times. That's 100. 10 to the third power is 10 times itself, 10 times itself, times itself. That would be 1,000. It would have 3 zeros, 10 to the third power. 10 to the 119,000th power is 10 with 119,000 zeros behind it. Those big numbers get lost easily in the human brain, so a good analogy to help folks understand how big this is. If you measured the size of the entire universe, as far as we can see, estimates are the universe currently that we can observe with our current telescopes is probably 15 to 20 billion light years across. At the speed of light, which is pretty fast, take 15 or 20 billion years to get across the galaxy, the universe that we see. Change that to inches. That is 10 to the 28 inches. The current observable universe is 10 to the 28th power inches in diameter. That's a huge number. 10 to the 29th would be 10 times bigger than that. 10 to the 30th is 10 times bigger than that. 10 to the 119,000th is real big. So that's the odds that these people are gambling on that a DNA could happen by chance. I tell people, look, if you want to believe that, that's perfectly fine. I don't care what you believe. They say the odds of a DNA happening, there's all kinds of analogies have been given to try to help people understand. If you filled the space of the entire solar system, you got Mercury, Venus, Earth, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, way out there. If you filled that entire space with pennies, painted one of them red, let a blind man loose, he has one chance to find the red penny. Those kind of analogies help you understand, and the brain can't absorb this no matter how you try to explain it, but that's the chances of one DNA happening by chance. Well, I did a spoof on evolution, I call it, just as fun, because I knew that the chromosome number does certainly not follow the expected evolutionary pattern. Since each chromosome is the most complex molecule we know of, I said, you know, the more chromosomes you have, the more complicated you would be. And I've had, of course, evolutionists, they blast every sentence in my seminar, and they've blasted this one saying, oh, no, it's not the chromosome number, it's the number of genes. And, you know, because some chromosomes are longer than others. you know, how many rungs on that ladder for a human versus how many rungs on that ladder for a hamster. Okay, there are different lengths of chromosomes. All chromosomes are not equal. They've not even all been studied to know how many genes there are on each one. But the number of chromosomes also has a factor involved in the complexity of the organism. Penicillin has 2 chromosomes. So when a penicillin divides or grows, it only has 2 chromosomes that have to unwind, split, copy themselves, and wind back together. Which, of course, requires a lot of energy for this to happen also. And that's another whole long system on how Michael Behe's book, Darwin's Black Box, explaining the complexity of the cell, is really amazing. Well worth reading. But fruit flies have 8 chromosomes. So I put these animals and plants and things in order as a spoof to make fun of the evolution theory, how that, you know, the more complex you get, the more you evolve. And how penicillin evolved first and slowly turned into a fruit fly. And over millions of years, got some more chromosomes and became either a tomato or a housefly. They're twins, you know. Nobody can tell the difference between a tomato and a housefly. They both have 12 chromosomes. This would be like the number of instruction manuals to build that organism. A tomato and a housefly, same number of chromosomes. Does that prove anything? Slowly it evolved into a pea, of course, with 14 chromosomes, and then I add the numbers up. These are the actual number of chromosomes found in these organisms. Now, possums, redwood trees, and kidney beans all have 22. Proving, of course, you know, they're twins, identical triplets this time, you know, closely related. Most people can't tell the difference between a possum, a redwood tree, and a kidney bean. Average scientists can't, that's for sure, because they're, you know, obviously identical. And then slowly, over millions of years, we evolved enough chromosomes and finally became a human. Humans have 46. What happens if a human gets extra chromosomes? Anybody know what that's called? Sometimes kids are born with 48 chromosomes.
Really?
Down's syndrome. Mongoloid. Extra pair of chromosomes. Is it advantageous? No. It's a disadvantage. 46 chromosomes. Now, if we can just get 2 more chromosomes, we should be a tobacco plant. They have 48. They're way ahead of us evolving. And you can see, obviously, tobacco and chimpanzees are twins, you know, identical. Dogs and chickens are also. They both have 78 chromosomes. Now, why would a chicken have more chromosomes than a human? And then, of course, slowly over millions of years, we got enough chromosomes to become a carp. More than twice as complex as humans. A simple carp. And a fern has 480 chromosomes. And some evolutionists will argue, yeah, but the number of genes is different on these things. Okay, but they're missing the entire point. Probably intentionally, they're missing the point. But this textbook, and like most textbooks you have there in front of you, will try to show the kids that DNA similarities proves some kind of relationship. Here's what they've done. You take the chromosome of a human, let's say, and there's only 4 types of base pairs. I think they label them A, D, I used to know the names of them, I'm going blank right now. But they give them a letter. Let's call it A, B, C, D. That's not the right letters, but it's close to that. They will take the sequence. They'll say, look, a human's, the sequence, like the code, is, you know, A, B, C, D, D, A, B, A, C. And they put this long sequence of letters, okay? Then they line up the sequence of letters for a chimpanzee. And they find how many places do they match. Look at that. In the 7th column, they both got an A. Wow. And in the 10th column, they both have a B. Wow, that proves we're related. I don't know how this logic got into there, but that's what they think. So they've compared these long sequence of letters. I guess they have nothing else to do with their grant money. And they compare these long sequence of letters and say, humans and chimpanzees are 98.2% similar. So when they say the DNA is similar, they're saying the sequence of these base pairs matched 98% of the time. Well, Jan, you've taught English for years. I'm sure you could think up all kinds of sentences that are 98% similar. Only a few letters are different. But the sentence means something very different. You only got to change a letter here and there to totally change a word. Nick, trying to learn English, you know how many words there are? There's only one letter different, and it's a totally different word. Very difficult. And Russian probably has the same thing, right? With different words. Look almost the same. One letter's different, means something totally different. What we ought to go through, somebody maybe could do that, is make a sentence or a paragraph that is 98% similar, but have a totally different meaning. That would be a neat spoof to do. I'd like to have one to use in my seminar here. Does that prove they're related? Absolutely nothing. This has nothing to do with relationship. The fact that all forms of life, or all these chromosomes, have the same 4 base pairs is like saying, and they'll say, see, that proves evolutionary relationship. I would say, no, wait a minute. You can come to my library, and you'll notice all the books in there, written in English, have only 26 basic letters. Same 26 letters used over and over and over and over again. Aren't they? Does that prove they're related somehow? No. That proves that's the code you write words from. And the code you write chromosomes from is this base pair code, which proves the designer thought, I'm going to make them similar so that the brown cow can eat the green grass and digest it. If each organism had its own separate code, like when I try to see the Russian words or the German or the French or the Italian as I travel around, a lot of, like Chinese, Jan, you over in China, they have a different code. They don't use any of our letters. You not only have to learn the language, you have to learn the letters. That's where it's a little easier to learn French or Spanish. At least they've got the same letters we do in most cases, a few different. Russians, of course, make their R backwards from us, and whatever that means. But the code has some similarities, but it also has some differences between these languages. The code for life is pretty much the same. And some have argued that's evidence of evolution. No, no, no. That's evidence that the designer made it where we can, eat and digest these things. If they all had different codes, it wouldn't work. Eric, if I gave you a Russian newspaper and said, I want you to cut out the letters and reassemble them and make an English sentence, you probably could do that. If I said, I want you to cut out the letters and make a whole book, well, you probably eventually are going to come across some letters that Russians don't have, that you need in English, but they don't have one available. Same thing if you're translating from Russian to English, okay? There may be some letters, I don't know which ones, that they don't exist. Do you have an X in Russian? You have an X? Do you have the R facing the right way, or just the backwards R? Just the backwards one, not the regular one. So you'd be hard-pressed then to make a lot of words. How many words have an R that you now cannot make? It would greatly limit your ability to write that book. Certain words you just can't use. There aren't any available. So if there weren't similarities of these base pairs and of the amino acids and in the chromosomes, in the DNA structure and in the molecules and in the proteins, we couldn't digest anything else except other humans. That'd be very unhandy after a couple of generations. So they'll say, orangutans are 96% similar, and the textbook shows the kids a graph here and says, see, this tells how many millions of years ago we evolved from a common ancestor. Well, that is just silly, okay? It doesn't prove we evolved from a common ancestor 15 million years ago from a monkey group. It could prove we have a common designer, and the same guy wrote these codes. Certain authors, when they write, they'll use certain words over and over again. And sometimes they have certain styles of writing, these different authors do. But judging by that, same DNA code would prove the same engineer wrote the codes, not evolution. So why the textbooks always teach the kids this is evidence for evolution is beyond my comprehension. Either they're not capable of thinking, maybe this proves a common designer, or they're running from that designer, like Romans chapter 1 tells us. They do not want to retain God in their knowledge. And so they only see it one way.